Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome to Sofa Reviews. Today we're watching Police Assassins.
Also known as Yes Madam or Huang Jiaxi Ji, it was released in 1985 and is a martial arts movie starring Michelle Yeoh and Cynthia Rothrock.
We start with Michelle Yeoh clamping a buck on a guy's penis.
She's Inspector Ng, and before she can get back to the station, she's interrupted by an armed robbery.
Using her jump cut powers, she kills two of the men while the others flee.
They escape in a van while she attempts to shoot them from afar.
She somehow hits the tyre from distance with a shotgun, causing the van to flip over.
After the opening action scene, we then get a Dirty Harry moment.
I don't know if I have any shots left, but do you want to take the chance, huh?
Back at the station, and she's rewarded with flowers for foiling an armed robbery, which seems quite disappointing, really.
After that, she goes to meet Richard Norden, her former trainer, for dinner that evening.
In the hotel, we see that Norden is being watched by a suspicious man, while two petty criminals are dressing up as hotel staff to steal from the rooms.
The one with glasses is called Strepsil, and the other is called Aspirin.
Which is presumably meant as a joke, because these people are painful to watch.
Norden hides a microfilm in his passport before getting a visitor.
Hello, Mr. Dick.
You've lost the subtle nuance of the language with your clumsy translation. It's pronounced penis.
Mr. Dick offers Norden $1 million for the microfilm as it could stop a $2.4 billion takeover.
Of course, now that he's older, he apparently needs more money and so goes back on the deal.
Instead of negotiating, Mr. Dick takes out his gun, sticks it at an apple and shoots Norden.
Well, he clearly wanted him to get his $5 a day.
Mr. Dick goes about searching for the microfilm but is interrupted by Aspirin posing as room service.
Luckily, shooting someone through an apple means there's no exit wound or blood, and so he poses Norden to look like he's asleep.
Aspirin steals his wallet and the passport before Michelle Yeoh arrives.
Have you forgotten? We have a dinner date tonight. Richard?
She eventually realises that he's dead and goes chasing after Aspirin.
However, the lift is too slow and they escape before she can get to the lobby.
Later on, we see Aspirin and Strepsil dividing up the loot, and they decide to give the passport to their friend Panadol.
Panadol is a forger and we see him dealing with some unhappy customers.
They throw a grenade in, which he just passes back out, and luckily it's one of those explosions that doesn't hurt anyone.
It turns out they have a problem with the passports and guns that he sold them.
These revolvers cost me $2,000 each. What do I get for my money? Toy guns from a supermarket.
They look like the real thing. What do you expect from a forgery?
That's a fair point. It might also be the most sensible thing anyone ever says in this film.
He then proves that the guns are good enough by mixing one real one with all the fake ones.
See, can't tell which one is real.
Unfortunately, instead of accepting the logic of his argument, they just start beating him up.
Aspirin and Strepsil turn up and pretend to be police, causing the thugs to flee.
Using the meat cleaver that he keeps on a chain, Panadol cuts the rope ladder, presumably killing all three of them.
Panadol, what's going on? Are you in trouble again?
It turns out they're all brothers, and we see Aspirin and Panadol always fighting.
They're collecting money for an old man who is presumably their father.
We then meet the main villain of the movie, Mr. Tin.
Mr. Dick explains that he doesn't have the microfilm, but guarantees that he'll get it back.
If you guarantee it, then I feel better.
Panadol changes the picture in the passport, but doesn't notice the microfilm.
Madam, here's the autopsy report in Norden.
What did they say? Suicide?
Suicide? What, so he just choked himself on the apple? Just to avoid dinner with you?
Thankfully, they realise it's murder.
The death was caused by a 4.5mm projectile which entered the front and came out the back.
Ah, he means a bullet.
Or a miniature Superman.
The chief explains that because Norden was working on a case, a British police officer will be sent over to investigate.
Of course, what we really need is more time with the comic relief guys.
They explain that Norden was murdered and that the passport might lead back to them. So they go to see Panadol, who's visiting their dad.
And this bit in the old people's home is really funny, because they make it look like they're going to rape the woman, but they're actually just stealing chicken.
The matron stops them because they're on a diet, but the three stooges show up with gifts.
Let's see. Jen!
What about these?
It's really sweet watching these three idiots trying to kill off these three old men.
The dad, played by Sammo Hung, another action star who trained with Jackie Chan, explains to them that they should probably tip off the police about the passport.
After receiving the anonymous tip, Michelle Yeoh heads to the airport.
So we see the guy attempting to use the fake passport.
Please remove your glasses.
Wow, that photo really catches your crazy staring eyes.
We get our first kung fu fight of the movie as Michelle Yeoh tries to arrest the guy and he tries to flee.
It's comforting to see how good airport security really is.
He runs along, eventually picking the worst possible person he could have as a hostage, Cynthia Rothrock.
Luckily, she happened to be wearing a skirt with the sides cut, and so she's able to kick the crap out of the guy.
Bizarrely, one of the cops tries to arrest her.
I'm a police officer, and I'm placing you under arrest for disturbing the peace and causing an affray.
Well, while you're at it, you may as well arrest her for doing your job and emasculating you.
Their boss shows up and explains that she's the investigator from England.
Now that they know they're meant to work together, they instantly hate each other. Because women are a jumbled mess of anger, insecurity and competition. Or because the plot says so, whichever you prefer.
Back at the station, Yeoh offers the suspect a cup of tea to convince him to talk.
However, Cynthia Rothrock knows she can't make tea for shit and stops the guy drinking it in her fancy April O'Neil outfit.
This does at least lead to a decent good cop bad cop routine.
Complete with police brutality, although I'm sure usually the good cop is meant to be there to break it up.
They eventually stop her and decide to take the suspect to hospital, but he escapes along the way.
It turns out all of this is a cunning plan so they can follow the guy to Panadol.
He does this by strangely climbing up the building and attacking Panadol in his apartment.
Although this action scene is utterly ridiculous and full of bizarre props.
Hey!
The thug catches up to Panadol as he's trying to escape, so he jumps out the window.
Isn't this the fourth film we've seen where that's happened?
Anyway, the thug finally catches up to Panadol and threatens to throw him off a roof before Cynthia Rothrock turns up.
In typical British cop fashion, she's incredibly trigger-happy and shoots the thug.
This causes Panadol to fall, getting caught in a load of debris.
Luckily, a sudden, jarring jolt to the neck does absolutely no damage to him, and she shoots him free.
Back at the station, Rothrock seems pretty ready to start beating him up before Michelle Yeoh shows up.
Beating people isn't always the answer.
That's right, and without any reason. I guess she's having her period.
Because that's the best thing to say to an angry and violent woman.
She shows Panadol some photos in order to identify who sold him the passport.
Thankfully, he very quickly snaps under the weight of his own stupidity.
Over at Mr. Tin's house, we meet Mr. Eyebrows?
He's called Mad Dog, and that's pretty much all you need to know.
Mr. Dick tracks Strepsil and Aspirin to a pool hall as they're about to get beaten up.
He ends up having to fight off the gang while they run off into a nightclub.
Luckily, they happen to run into the club that the police officers are in as they're looking for them.
Mr. Dick drags the two guys off to the toilet. I've got a bad feeling about this one.
He asks them where the passport is before the women turn up to save the day.
Hold it!
That door wasn't locked. Why would you kick it?
This leads to a pretty decent fight scene that shows off what all three actors are capable of, while Aspirin and Strepsil escape.
They eventually decide that the only place they'll be safe is in jail, and so they beat up a policeman to get arrested.
However, Michelle Yeoh decides to let them go as she can use them as bait.
Of course, they have one last desperate attempt to get arrested.
They decide to help the police, but instead take them to the pool hall so they can attempt to get revenge.
The women quickly work out what's going on, and so leave them to get beaten up.
The police tell them that they have to return everything that was stolen before they can help them, so they return to Panadol.
After lots of tedious bickering, they eventually find the microfilm.
Streps wants to give it to the police, however Panadol and Aspirin decide that they could get a lot of money out of it.
They make a quick switch for another microfilm, giving Strepsil the fake while they arrange a meeting with Mr. Tin.
Armed with this new evidence, the police go to arrest Mr. Tin.
They are kind enough to warn him in advance so that Mr. Dick can hide.
Back at the station, we find the chief is there to see them.
It turns out they didn't even look at the microfilm before running off to arrest Mr. Tin.
Because of this error in judgment, the chief decides to take over, handing both of the officers plane tickets.
Thanks, sir. But I won't be needing your ticket.
Hey, what's this?
Even if I have to quit, I'm gonna make sure Tin is caught.
I think you got the message, so I won't bother repeating it, sir.
Meanwhile, Aspirin goes to visit Mr. Tin to negotiate for the microfilm.
Of course, Aspirin is as good at negotiating as he is at anything else, and so gets beaten up.
Elsewhere, a naked Strepsil is beaten up by the former policewomen looking for the real microfilm.
And to complete the set, Panadol is beaten up by Mr. Dick.
Mr. Dick gets the microfilm and shoots Panadol as Strepsil shows up with the women.
Luckily the one Mr. Dick leaves with is fake, and Panadol explains to Strepsil where the real one is hidden, just before dying.
This causes Strepsil to flip out, arming himself with every weapon he can find before driving off on a scooter to meet with Mr. Tin.
He runs into the house for a confrontation with Mr. Tin.
Are we meant to sympathise with this guy? Are we even meant to care what's going on anymore?
Strepsil swallows the microfilm. Mad Dog wants to cut him open to take it.
As it'll dissolve in his stomach, they could just give him a meal and look after him for about half a day. But apparently burning him is a much more reasonable option.
Luckily, the former cops show up and they start an impressive fight scene to save the day.
There are some really cool bits in this huge battle, but I do feel kind of sorry for the stuntmen.
After easily dispatching a bunch of guys, they finally face off against Mad Dog and Mr. Dick.
Hey! You said you didn't need a knife, you chicken.
You are using logic against someone called Mad Dog.
Eventually, Yeo finishes off Mad Dog before going off to help Rothrock.
And just like in the club toilet, the two women double-team Mr. Dick.
Mr. Tin shows up with aspirin and Strepsil reveals that he didn't actually swallow the microfilm.
Mr. Dick gets the microfilm and finally manages to destroy it.
Aspirin attacks Mr. Dick with the only gun that works on Strepsil's belt, killing him.
Before he can kill Mr. Tin, the police show up and arrest everyone.
As they're taken away, Aspirin is told that Panadol is dead.
I'm gonna get you! You're a bastard!
He's dead? There really is no justice. No justice? There is! Why don't you look around you? The bad guys have been arrested or are now out of action, and the good guys like me will be released and live happily ever after.
It's here the film abruptly finishes with a happy ending, as Aspirin takes the law into his own hands and guns down Mr. Tin.
In conclusion, there are some good things to this movie. It's an 80s movie with a good retro style and atmosphere, and we do get a fair bit of martial arts in the movie as well.
Well, you say that, but a lot of the film is actually following the Three Stooges as they stumble around in this ridiculous plot that doesn't make much sense. It actually feels like most of the fighting scenes were just thrown in as an afterthought.
True, but at least Michelle Yeoh and Cynthia Rothrock are actually really good, capable fighters, and Dick Way is also a very good fighter, and is quite intimidating as a bad guy.
If you move, I'll kill you both right now.
Yeah, he's easily the best character in this film. Even the policewomen are actually quite stupid, and it's really tedious having to watch them argue for no real reason.
Let me tell you something. I didn't ask to be put on this case, Inspector.
I guess ultimately I would recommend this movie if you want a good old-fashioned 80s martial arts cop flick. It has a lot of good fighting and stunt work, especially in the final battle in Mr. Tin's house.
True, the final battle is pretty good. I'd probably recommend you skip the entire film up to that point. The rest of it is just ridiculous slapstick over martial arts, but it actually has a bizarre, dark ending. It almost seems like the moral of the story is that the bad guys will always get away with it, so you might as well just kill them.